All rise, please.
I understand there are a number of questions that you've been requested to put.
There are.
Yes.
There are, sir. Mr. Smith, in answer to the first question, please, can you simply reply in relation to your period of time in the SDS? Okay. Was there a time when you were on the SDS where the unit, the SDS, were writing targeting papers for C Squad?
I don't remember anything of that, no.
Thank you. The next issue is going back to something you said this morning. You said that there was a danger to the squad if it became known outside, I think special branch is what you were referring to. I just wanted to explore that a little bit more with you, if I could. Why did you consider it might have been a danger to the squad's existence if they had been found out, if you like?
Well, quite simply, if they'd been, if their security had been blown, then their existence could well be jeopardised, and they wouldn't exist anymore. And they wouldn't be able to provide the service to essentially A8 and ourselves in terms of understanding what was happening. It was no more than that, and obviously that's in respect of the squad. That was it. Yes.
Was there a concern about embarrassment that could be caused if its operations had been known outside of special branch?
Embarrassment? No. It's just as simply that the squad couldn't have existed. Different entirely to the individual. The individual could have been at risk personally and physically, but that's a different issue.
Was there any kind of concern that you knew about that officers were doing things perhaps that they shouldn't do, and that was why the squad would be put in danger if they were known about outside of special branch?
No, I can't think of anything. As I say, the only thing that was considered as, I won't say reasonable, but inevitable was that once in a blue moon someone would be arrested for obstruction. But other than that, no.
Thank you. You referred to extreme left-wing groups this morning. Was that a particular definition as you understood it at the time?
It was a general definition. I think it was a sort of thing you'd read in the newspapers, or we would know, or anybody would know. It was Trotskyist groups, anarchists, which aren't, I suppose, strictly left, but they're still regarded as extreme. Maoist, for example, groups which were minority groups, but nevertheless were very vocal and capable of creating a problem.
Was that something you would have been instructed when you were in C Squad before you joined?
Well, instructed, but just picked up naturally, yes. So you just knew that. I mean, it was, as I said, it was common knowledge. It wasn't something confined to special branch.
Thank you. Can I ask you to have a look at a document that you looked at this morning, please? It's MPS 0729093. And it's page 2. Thank you. And it's the centre of the page. The question I had is, if you can see number 2, and sorry, by that I mean that on the top left-hand side,
Yes.
it says room 892 to note. Can you see that?
Yes.
Are you able to help us with what room 892 was in 1973, as you recall?
I can make a stab at it, certainly. There was an office which dealt with a sort of summary of SB activity, which was manned by an inspector and a sergeant, I think. And I can remember the office in the old building, in the old pre-1967 building, and I think it probably existed in, obviously, again in this building, so it's possible. So in other words, it was an office which did summary of SB activity across the board, and so it's just for them to be aware of, perhaps, I don't know. But that's the best I can come up with. I can't think of anything else that could be.
Thank you. Take that down, please. You told us this morning, in answer to some questions about reputations that I asked you, specifically in relation, I think, to Rick Clark. I asked you about,
yes.
and another officer whose name we're not using.
Yes.
You told us that you heard 10 to 15 years later, after your time in the SDS, perhaps about a reputation. Was that in relation to Rick Clark? If not, I can give you the
Oh no, it's the other
right.
chap. I remember you saying
you
this.
clear who we're talking about.
Yes, I know who you're talking about. Yes,
Right. And it was
the other man.
So it's HN 300. We know him.
Yes.
as.
Yeah, I'll just confirm.
Yes,
that.
please do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's the chap I had in mind. Yes.
And what was the reputation you heard? Or
A womanizer.
A womanizer.
Yes. Yes. There was no ambiguity there with him. I'm afraid he was that way inclined.
And did you hear this from another colleague in Special Branch or from a
I heard
superior?
it from many colleagues, I imagine.
Don't name them, please, but you heard it from more than one person. Did
Oh
you?
yes. Yes, I think it was common knowledge.
And was there a particular event that had happened to him that led you to be talking about him 10 to 15 years later, or was this just something that came up in conversation?
No, no particular event. It was just common knowledge, as I say.
Okay. Thank you. Can I ask you to look at another document, please? It's UCPI 35070. And page 4 specifically, please. Maybe, in fact, page 5, sorry. Sorry, can we go down one more page, please? We'll come back to that in a moment, if I may. I'm just going to locate a reference and then ask you about it. You told us that, in answer to my question about registry files being taken down to the safe house, these files, were they of individuals, as I understood your evidence to be? Were they people that you as managers wanted the officers to target, or were they people that the officers had asked?
The people, not so much target, but what did they have any information they could do to add to existing knowledge? It wasn't a question of saying, well, can you make them a special target? Just, can you help? Do you know this chap and can you fill in anything on him? It wasn't as if there was some special project.
And was the purpose of taking these files down to assist the officers with their deployment?
Yes, it was the officer who'd brought the file in. It was, if he could find out a bit more through the officer, because there was a reasonable chance he might know him, then you'd ask him, you know.
So you mean the other officers from elsewhere in Special Branch asking the
Yeah,
deployed
they would
officer?
come in to our office with the file, and we would then put the file into the bag, direct it to a particular officer, or it might be two officers, with a note on it saying, can you help with this? And there would probably be a letter or something on the file which indicate what the nature of the inquiry was.
I see. Thank you. Can we have another go with that document I asked you to look at before, please? It's UCPI 35070. It's page 8, I'm told, that I'd like to look at, please. Thank you. And it's the bottom half of the page. Now this, Mr. Smith, is a registry file history sheet, as we understand it.
Oh, I know what you mean, yes.
You may have been familiar with these when you were in Special Branch, and this is in relation to one of our core participants, Diane Langford. Now, you'll see on the left-hand side by the dates, markings that read SP and C. Now, we have received some evidence that these relate to security classifications.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been told that SP means secret pink and C means confidential.
Yes.
Does that accord with your
Yes.
recollection at the time? What I'd be interested to know, Mr. Smith, is that those security classifications, were those classifications that you would put on SDS reports when they left you, or would they be put on by Special Branch?
We would stamp them secret straight away
Right.
before they left our office. You didn't use confidential because of the source. And secret pink was a nomenclature, if that's the right word, of a particular file. It's a grade of secrecy, and above that there was another
Yes,
grade.
we've heard some evidence about that. And so would you ever put any security classification other than secret on your reports when they left SDS?
No, they're always secret.
So would it be fair to assume that it is likely that whoever put those markings on this history sheet would have been within Special Branch rather than the SDS?
They would have been possibly in Special Branch records. I don't know. I think what happened was that the file went over to SB because I think on the minuting it would say SBR records to index and PA, which has been put away, or RBF, bring back in 2 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was just the phraseology they used. But I think these were typed in almost certainly by Special Branch records. So someone in there would look at it and do just literally a two-liner of what that reference was about, what the entry was about.
So that the decision on which level of security classification, if I can put it that way, that would be taken outside.
Within the branch.
Within the
without a
branch.
shadow of doubt, yes.
Right,
Yes.
thank you, but outside of the SDS.
No. Sometimes, I mean, I've got these other files, whatever it is, confidential probably was from somewhere within the branch.
Right.
SP, we did, others used SP. I mean, it wasn't, it was a common grading that was used throughout the branch.
It wasn't the case that just all SDS intelligence was graded secret pink, for instance.
Well, it was common that it was all graded secret,
Yes.
but the file that was put on could have been secret pink or it could have been a different secret file.
I see.
So it's just, we kicked it off and said, look, here, this is secret. And then at Chief Inspector level, when it went to the various squads, they would then put it on the appropriate file as they saw fit.
Thank you. If we could take that down, please. Another question, please, Mr. Smith. The inquiry has heard some evidence after you were involved in the unit that there was at times a black folder which was kept within the safe house, which had a number of pieces of advice and guidance for UCOs about how to conduct their deployments. Do you ever recall there being a black folder when you were in the SDS?
No, the first time I heard of the black folder was many, many years later. It might have been at the very end of my service, or it may have been after that again, at a reunion or something. Or even when I've had just bits and pieces of discussion about the fact this inquiry was taking place. I wasn't aware of it.
Next question, please. The term weary has been used by some officers to describe the people that they were reporting on, the people in the groups that they were providing intelligence on. Was the term weary something you ever heard when you were in the SDS?
No, never.
You've told us that an undercover officer was withdrawn due to not having proper identification.
Yes.
Now, I don't want you to name that person, but the question I wanted to ask you, please, is it one of the 3 people that were withdrawn in January 1973? And I'll give you their numbers.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't. Do you need to recollect who they were, or are you confident?
I know those 3 you mentioned. I can recall them, yes.
Thank you. The day of the jackal, you said that it might have been a chicken or egg sort of situation, and you remember sort of mootings about it, I think you said.
That may have triggered someone saying that that was what we should do, or someone then said, oh, hang on, that's exactly what happened in the day of the... I can't remember that.
So were you speculating that it might have been, or do you recall
I don't know.
a conversation
It was
about it?
either or. Could have been either or.
Right. Next, in relation to the policy change to use deceased children's identities that I mentioned just before lunch, would you, as the back office sergeant, would expect to have been informed of that change?
Which policy was it in particular?
The starting of using deceased children's identities from records held at Somerset House. Is that something you would expect to have been told or found out about?
My problem with that is I can't remember when I became aware of it, but at some point, somewhere along the line, either before or after, I just don't know when. I would have thought it would have been mentioned, but not necessarily, because I wasn't involved in establishing that identity. That was very much the province of the Chief Inspector and the Inspector and the Sergeant, but it wasn't absolute that I would have been told.
Understood. Positions of responsibility. You told us that you would not have expected during your time on the SDS, deployed officers, to assume particular positions of responsibility within groups that they were reporting on. Now, we know that HN298, who we discussed before lunch, and please remind yourself if you need to know who we're talking about.
I think I'm pretty
Please do
certain
check.
you're talking about, but I'll just be sure. Yes.
He became the membership secretary of the Young Liberals in January 1972 when you were within the SDS. Are you surprised that a UCO did something like that when you were on the squad?
Yes, I would have been. But I certainly didn't. I don't recall it at all. But yes, I would have been surprised. Yes.
Do you think that's the sort of thing that might have been approved by those above you in the management chain, or by you even?
Well, presumably if they knew of it, they would have approved it. The only thing I can say is that being the Young Liberals, and because we weren't bothered about the Young Liberals, it was seen as not that much of a problem. I mean, had it been IMG, well, yes, definitely a problem. But because it was simply a stepping stone to something else. And he was interested anyway in that arm of the Young Liberals that was into the anti-apartheid movement, and those demonstrations it'd have been far less heinous, so I say, if that's the right word.
Why would it have been more of a problem if it was a group like the IMG, for instance?
Because obviously they shouldn't be seen as being anywhere in a situation which could be construed as agent provocateur or having extra influence within the group. The idea was to be, as I said, just a rank and file, fly on the wall member of the group.
You mentioned the anti-apartheid movement just a moment ago.
Yeah.
Can you help us with why the SDS was interested in the anti-apartheid movement?
Well, partly much to do with things like Stop the 70 tour. I don't know if you obviously will have heard of that.
Yeah.
Demonstrations of that nature, where they would invade a football pitch or a rugby pitch, more precisely, and do things. So that would have been it.
Were you interested in the individuals within the anti-apartheid movement? And what I mean by that is people like Peter Hain, Lord Hain, who was...
Well, he was the one that was organising a lot of that, yes. Obviously, what he was directing and doing, he would have been aware of what was happening on that particular front. And yes, to that extent, I would have been interested in him.
Smith, finally this. I asked you about arrests just before lunch, and you mentioned that offences like obstruction might be considered the sort of maximum acceptable offence that an officer might be arrested for. If forgive me, I'm paraphrasing what you said.
Yeah, you did.
And what I wanted to know is are you in that referring to obstruction just of the highway? Would obstruction of a police officer be considered in a similar way by the SDS?
Well, I think it's obstruction along the lines of sitting down in the road and blocking the traffic, or something along those lines. not of a police officer, which is a more, it's further down the line, but as I would see it.
You would have considered it slightly more serious.
Oh yes. So if you're obstructing a police officer, provided that was proven, obviously, like
Yes.
anything. But yes.
Mr. Smith, thank you very much. Those are the only questions that I have for you.
Thank you.
Any re-examination, Mr. Saunders?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm sorry your departure has been delayed, but that now is an end of it. I'm very grateful to you for coming to assist the inquiry. I'm now going to rise so as to permit arrangements to be set up for the next witness, Mr. Creamer, to give evidence over the live screen.
All rise, please.
Mute.
Mr. Creamer.
Sir, good afternoon.
John Mitting speaking, Chairman of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. I'm very grateful to you for coming to assist us. I realise that, remarkably, I was aged 7 when you joined the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, it was a long time ago.
I understand you prefer to be sworn.
Yes.
Yes, then Mr. Fernandez will do the necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Creamer. Please place your Bible in your right hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Creamer, could we start with your full name, please?
Roy Creamer. No middle name.
You've provided a witness statement dated the 4th of November 2020. Are the contents of your witness statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, sir.
And you joined the Metropolitan Police in 1954, is that right?
Yes.
And you moved to Special Branch in 1958.
Yes.
And between joining Special Branch in 1958 and joining the SDS in 1968, you spent a fair bit of your time working for C Squad. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And C Squad was the branch of Special Branch which dealt with the far left.
More or less, but I think it did move to B Squad at the time when I came back from port. It was B Squad. They took over the far left and left C Squad to do what they normally did.
I see. And what was that?
Look after the Communist Party side of them.
And did there come a time when the far left went back to C Squad?
Yes.
Can I ask you how deep a knowledge of the far left did you develop whilst working for B and C Squads before you joined the SDS?
Not a lot. I mean, I went to a lot of meetings, well, not a lot, but I mean, more than I would expect. And mostly of left-wing character. And I was interested to find out about all the different groups, how they differ from each other and all that kind of thing. So I was interested as an individual. I wasn't told anything about what to do. Simply there, report what you heard, put it down, and look for the next opportunity to go out and about. I think in those days, the groups that were not communist were hardly thought much of. Generally they were small, and generally they were quite, when you went there, quite sincere and genuine, in their beliefs. And I think as time went by, particularly towards 68 and so on, they got stronger and did begin to cause a problem. But for the most part, in the early days, there was no trouble from them at all.
Did your interest mean that you developed a good knowledge of the groups?
it could have been better, but yes, it's fair enough.
The inquiry has been told that the anarchist Stuart Christie described you as, and I'm now quoting, the Yard's dialectician of dissent.
Yes, well, you may well have done. But the thing is that in those days, this is before the SDS, the usual behaviour for a man in my position was to try and meet personally with the leading lights on the other side. There was two reasons for this. One was that, particularly with anarchists, say, who openly, boast that they will assassinate leaders if they felt like it. We were sent to, say, processions, royal processions, or other big public occasions, and it was important for me to know, or somebody to know, who were the mischievous and likely people to either throw a bomb or whatever it is that anarchists might be up to. So really, I had no unease about talking to Christie, and for the life of me, I really didn't mind what he thought, to be honest. I mean, I was always pleasant with him, and in many ways, even after later things when we could have been enemies, I always got on well with him as somebody, old acquaintance, basically. It wasn't anything more than that.
And how well did you get to know Mr. Christie?
Well, in a way that if he saw me, he would talk to me, or I would talk to him. But I never knew anything about his private life. I knew he was married and had children and so on, but I had a daughter and things like that. But that was incidental. I mean, I didn't ask him about that sort of thing. And I didn't really ask him about anarchism or anything. There was a shop in Red Lion Square run by Albert Meltzer. Now, Meltzer was a chap I really got on with because, well, he's an ex-wrestler, a big man, and very courteous and so on and so forth. Christie used to help him. But I went into the shop really to sort through Meltzer's books and find books about anarchism if there were that I would possibly be able to buy or read on the spot. But more to the point, really, from a police point of view, to see what notices were in the window and on the counter and that kind of thing, saying things about which anarchist groups were going to hold a meeting or whatever. So it was a useful thing to do, but unfortunately, in a way, Christie used to be in there helping, and he, we had this kind of uneasy relationship, really. I wasn't going to hurt him, and he wasn't going to hurt me. And then there were times, for example, when he would see me at some of these left-wing meetings, and he'd whisper to his friends, "There's Creamy, from the Yard, blah, blah, blah." But he never did anything about it. And I always felt that even if he'd tried, have the advantage, really, because who was more likely to cause trouble at a left-wing meeting? An anarchist, not a police. They just said, tell me to go home or whatever. But they might be a bit more, fierce with him. So I didn't really mind that sort of situation.
How forthcoming were the likes of Mr. Meltzer and Mr. Christie in response to what I might call your direct approach?
About themselves, not a thing. I mean, I didn't expect that. But what was useful to me was what was their attitude to other groups. And that way, I mean, for example, I would say, what do you think of these Maoists and so on? And they would get on their platform, on their high whatever, and say, oh, they're a load of rubbish, and they've got no support anywhere, and we don't like them. And things to that, in that way, were helpful to me to sort of see what other people thought about them, the group, so that I could judge for myself whether they were all that they claim to be.
Did your interactions with people on the far left before you joined the SDS involve you going into private homes at all?
No. I think I should make it clear, sir, that in those days, if you were sent to cover a meeting and it was in a private home, you should, and you could, for example, go back to the yard and say, no, I can't get in there because it's a private house. Not merely could, but you should. And some senior sergeants would, sort of be very annoyed with you if you came back and said, I couldn't get in. Now, others would say, well, you should have tried a bit harder. But the official line was, no way, you don't go in. And most of us knew that. But of course, because it happened so rarely, it kind of got overlooked, or people just didn't think about it.
Do you know why the instruction forbade you from entering private houses?
Not really, but I think you, in the ordinary course of police work, you wouldn't go into a person's private house without being invited. Now, this is a problem. They're holding a political meeting in a private house. So there is, by implication, an invitation to anybody to go there. Not necessarily anybody, but the people that were interested in the subject. So that if you got there and they weren't quite sure who you were, they'd welcome you anyway. And so that you could take advantage of that invitation. But the obverse of that is that if they knew that you were a police officer, the invitation wouldn't be there, would it? So you're in a sort of difficult sort of territory there. And I think the best way would be to solve it anyway, is not to go in. I mean, that's just from a practical point of view. It didn't matter what any other consideration applied. You were there not to cause waves and not to upset people, but to do the job in a discreet way. That was the emphasis, really.
Am I right to understand that the expertise that you developed was mainly in the fields of anarchism and Trotskyism?
Yeah, later on. Of course, I couldn't be an expert on Trotskyism straight off because it's complex and I didn't have a lot of time. Anarchism, yes, a bit more because I was interested in it. And I learned a lot from the subsequent experience I had with the Angry Brigade.
I'd like to ask you a few more questions now about anarchists. And these are on the theme of whether or not they should have been of interest to Special Branch. If we start perhaps with an easy example, the Angry Brigade plainly were of interest because they adopted violent means.
Yes, indeed.
What was your view in relation to the Friends of Freedom Press?
Now that's interesting because I was quite relaxed about them. For the most part, they were not, and in my view, dangerous anarchists or likely to assassinate anyone. They were more friends who got together in the belief that there should be more freedom for everybody to live. But mainly, they didn't like the communists. The communists and anarchists traditionally have been enemies, and whether it was in the Spanish Civil War or whatever, the anarchists got a very hard time from the communists when the communists got in Russia. So there was that background of their enemy was my enemy, so we had a little bit in common. So I could chat quite happily to them if I wanted to. But from a public order point of view, they were a bit difficult to assess because they were, on the whole, people like that are not physically big and strong. They're usually kind of academic or even small in stature and that kind of thing. And they're anarchists in a way that some artists believe that anarchism is a good thing. You know, they break traditional rules and all that kind of thing. And so I didn't think they were a force to be reckoned with. They weren't like rugby players or whatever, as you know, in physique, nor in intention. They didn't really want to fight anybody. So I rather felt it's not exactly a waste of time talking to anarchists, but it's you've got to be quite clear in your mind that they're not, you know, public order targets really. That is, we talk about freedom press law. I'm not saying that applies to all anarchists.
And staying with freedom press for the moment, was freedom press in any way a threat to the state?
No. I mean, in my estimation, no. I don't want to stick up for them too much because, you know, they can stick up for themselves. But from my estimation, if there were anarchists at a demonstration, the people that would support Freedom Press and the Federation of Anarchists would watch, and they might even jeer, and they might even take part like supporters at a football match would. But they weren't likely to do an awful lot. But the trouble with saying that is that there's another aspect to so-called anarchists, which covers the sort of hooligan element in demonstrations that don't want to obey anybody. They won't take discipline from the organisers or from the police or whatever. And that is called anarchism, but that is not what the Freedom Press law are like.
Moving away from the Freedom Press and having already dealt with the Angry Brigade, which were the anarchists who, in your experience, were trouble?
Well, from a public order point of view, any of them could be, but weren't, I don't think. It wasn't in the nature of anarchists to support or enhance the activities of any other group. They'd only do what they wanted to do. But there were one or two people in Solidarity and in some groups like that were difficult. And an example of that would be the people who helped the Russian spy to escape from prison and that kind of thing. They were of anarchist tendency. I must be careful because they were found not guilty of anything. But in reality, there was something there that needed to be kept an eye on, because it was very difficult. And I don't think we were up to, they were cleverer than us in many ways.
Forgive me for interrupting. Do you mean Blake?
I do.
Yeah.
Your witness describes some of them as too intellectual. Who did you have in mind as too intellectual?
Did I say that?
Yes. It says, these were the groups most likely to make trouble. There were some who were probably too intellectual and would not welcome people who did not know anything, and others were just drinking clubs.
Oh, well, you're talking in the context of, putting an undercover officer with them, aren't you? Well, that's true. I mean, if you went there and they started talking as the anarchists do, about Bakunin and all that kind of thing, it'd go over your head. And they would sense that it did, and they wouldn't take to you, really. They wouldn't welcome you in. But in theory, if you went to a left-wing group, ideally you should go as a sort of labourer and a working man. Because, it's all about workers, isn't it, really? It's not about intellectuals. And I felt that if they'd tried to get into an anarchist group at that time, A, it would be difficult, B, it would be a complete waste of time.
And why a waste of time?
Because they weren't up to much. Put it this way, if they were in the football team, they could sit on the bench and not play in the field.
Can we move now to Trotskyists? What was your view from a policing perspective of the IMG?
Well, I'll put it as simply as I can, sir. If you took the whole range of left-wing demonstrators, IMG and IS would be like Mayfair and Park Lane in the game of Monopoly. That is to say, they were the most difficult to get in. But if you did get in, you would learn a lot about what they were up to. Now, there was a kind of scale where other groups, say, for example, the Vietnam Solidarity, the Vietnam BSC groups, that were more like the Old Kent Road classification. That is to say, they were easy to get in, and they didn't really know an awful lot because they were taking all their instructions from elsewhere. And that's roughly what I thought about things, in general at that time.
Well, if we stick with the IMG, you say they were difficult to get in.
Yeah.
Were they involved in public order problems?
It was one of those difficult things in those days that they claimed, and maybe rightly, that they didn't want violence. No. But they weren't going to do an awful lot to stop it. If you contrast them, say, with Jerry Healy's lot, we'll call it Socialist Labour League, Healy would have none of it. He said, we're going to have a march, which is disciplined, and you'll all do as you're told. If the police say do this, you've got to behave. And I think he did that really to show up the falseness of IMG, who were not prepared to discipline, because they weren't numerically very strong themselves. If you take the IMG, I doubt if it was more than 100 strong. It might have been 200, but it certainly wasn't enough to provide marshals, nor were they the types of people that wanted to be marshals and keep discipline. They could be in some other group. I used to think at the time, how come that the left wing of the Labour Party, which of course are the nearest and closest neighbours to Trotskyists, don't go to them and say, what are you playing at? If you organise demonstrations that are rowdy and cause a lot of damage and stuff like that, you're not doing an awful lot of good, but you are damaging the Labour Party because we're in government. We'll get the responsibility, we'll be blamed if things get out of hand. So why don't you kind of calm down? And I think in the long run, that might have happened, but in the early days, they didn't. They took notice. Well, they just didn't care. They thought if it's, I think possibly because they were looking not at the Labour Party's problems, but at how it would look to, say, the Fourth International and people abroad. If there was a lot of fuss going on in London, good, that's what they wanted. So they didn't want to rein in on any disorder or rows or fights with the police or anything like that. That was, I think they stood on the side and said, oh, it's not our fault. No, that's not what we wanted. We didn't mean that. So it was rather a false position, I felt, that they were in. And the idea that there might be some secret Napoleon-type fellow saying, this is it, lads, this is the beginning of the revolution, and urging them on to stir up violence. I think when we came to look at the BSC demonstrations, I knew full well we'd never find such a man. There wasn't one. There wasn't a group even that would do that. I think it was a situation that got out of hand. They did nothing to stop it. And that's the worst you could say of them.
Thank you. Going back to the international socialists, we've heard evidence, certainly from the 1970s, particularly the late 70s, that the SWP, as it became, was very easy to join. So I was interested in your answer that suggested the IS might have been difficult to join. Is that really right?
Well, I had that impression at the time, but I'm not saying. If it subsequently turns out that you could fit in easily, well, I'd take it back. But
well, I'm conscious
I thought that at the time.
I'm conscious that I'm asking you about a period of time in the 1960s when IS was a lot smaller.
Yes.
Have you got a positive recollection, one way or the other, about IS in that era?
Well, I knew people who were in it, and I found them, they're all very reasonable, and they didn't. But how they would behave on a demonstration is a different question. And I thought if anybody went there in a clumsy way and was a bit, sort of. Police do ask a lot of questions, don't they? And if they gave the impression that they weren't genuinely socialist, if you know what I mean, that they would be caught out much more quickly in IS than in most other groups, because they're quite wide awake people, and they wouldn't be like Healy's lot, who were almost paranoid about people coming in and joining them. IS was a lot less like that. So, in a way, what you said, that they were easier to get in, is true. But it's true for an ordinary citizen. But for an undercover police officer, it's different, really. It would have been harder.
From your experience, were the international socialists a threat to public order?
Well, yes and no. I think they were prepared to organise big demonstrations, and like IMG, were not prepared to discipline them. So in a way, yes. But of course, it's a bit harsh to say that. But from a police point of view, which is what matters, that's what I would say, yes.
Moving to the Socialist Labour League, you've already made quite plain that you don't think that they were a public order threat. Were they of any policing interest at all?
Oh, well, they were not a public order threat simply because they were determined to have good demonstrations and were not let strangers or anybody come and join them. So give them credit for that their demonstrations were very good in a way, well handled by the police and well done by the organisers. But the Socialist Labour League, may I have a drop of water?
Of course.
The Socialist Labour League was not liked by many other groups. I mean, the discipline that Jerry Healy had was objectionable. I mean, they just... I remember saying to Conrad that on stage when he was suggesting that we put somebody in the Socialist Labour League, that they would have to stand outside the railway station at Clapham Common and sell newspapers, which, when you think you're going to send a young officer there who might see his friends or other police colleagues or something like that, saying, what are you doing that for? I mean, it would be a ridiculous thing to do and dangerous. So I had my feelings about them as a group. And also, I think the truth of it was that the Socialist Labour League aimed for support into trade unions. They wouldn't get it from political demonstrations. And I think that was a closed area to me. I didn't care about the trade, it wasn't my business to concern myself with trade unions. But I think that's where he drew his strength and support, if he had any. And at times he did, because he did have, you could number his demonstrations in hundreds, really. So it was a difficult one to assess, that one.
When you say the trade unions weren't your business, do you mean they weren't police business?
Well, yeah.
Now, I appreciate this may not be an area where you had quite the same depth of knowledge, but could I just ask you about Maoists? In your experience, did the Maoist groups present a public order threat? And if so, which ones?
I think I did write a report on Manchanda, didn't I?
You did. We'll come to that later specifically.
I was interested in that, of course. And going back to what I chatted to the anarchists about, they were an unknown factor. And I got the feeling that, first of all, whatever they said, they weren't sponsored by the Chinese embassy or anything like that. They were people usually from the Far East themselves who felt very strongly, obviously, about Vietnam, especially. Because, it was their patch. And they, by tradition of their ways, they would behave differently to us, and they would shout and scream and make a lot of fuss, which we would do as English people, so that you were in a bit of a difficulty to know how far this anger that they seemed to suggest was genuinely, help from a sense of injustice, or whether it was just their natural way. So you had to have difficulties with them. And I think the numbers, fortunately, were so small, they didn't really matter. A competent group of police officers could handle any kind of Maoist demonstration. And I know when I used to do assessments for Maoist, I generally wrote along the lines that they were noisy and that they were boisterous and that they were this, that and the other, but they were not dangerous.
Can I move now to anti-racism campaigners? People like the anti-apartheid movement. Did you have any experience of them?
No, I lost. I think when I'm not sure what happened, but I certainly didn't have anything to do with that.
Did you have anything to do with the far right?
In the early days, we were always sent to a far right meeting as part of our kind of introduction into the branch's work. And it'd been so discredited by what had happened during the war and that fascist was a absolutely, dead political idea altogether. Nobody would take it up. They were wasting their time trying to persuade the public towards their point of view. And I think we used to have to watch Oswald Mosley at Hyde Park Corner, and he would make very, well-chosen words and good speeches and that kind of thing. But the support for him from round and about was negligible. And to my mind, from my particular point of view, there was nothing interest in them. Nothing. They could be the victims of attacks by the left. That was a big problem. But on their own, they were of no account, really. And I think when they did have demonstrations on their own that weren't attacked by the left wing, nobody would know. I mean, it was so quiet and orderly.
What period of time are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about before the SDS.
Yeah, so in that era.
Oh,
I see. Thank you. Can I move now from the individual groups to ask you, in your experience, were if I call them traditional special branch methods of obtaining intelligence, in your opinion and experience, sufficient to deal with the public order problems that the police faced in London?
Up to the Vietnam demonstrations in March, would it be 67 or 68? I would have said yes, because generally speaking, they were smaller. They were less intense in the fact that the emotions that were prompting them to demonstrate were not that heavy. And the police also had how can I put it? They were respected more. There was, stories of the man on the white horse holding back a crowd at Wembley and that kind of thing. So they had that confidence and that know-how to deal with disorder, because it was small and it wasn't really very vicious. Now, after the March demonstration in London, where a lot of police were injured, of course it did change. And I think it was inevitable that we would have to increase our surveillance of left-wing groups a lot more. Just how that was to be done is, up to the powers that be. But I realised that we couldn't go on the way we were, because one sergeant and two constables, possibly, if he was lucky, would have to make an assessment for a demonstration. And in fact, most officers were reluctant to do it, because they said, look, we're not fortune tellers, we're not weather forecasters. What's going to happen is not, we can't say. I mean, it might be this, it might be that, but we can't forecast what a demonstration is going to be or how many people are turning up, because we're not equipped to do that. Oh, not able to do it, or we don't want to do it. And that was the key point, that they didn't want to do it. And in those days, we had a Chief Superintendent Gilbert who sent me out one day. Something had happened, and people were demonstrating outside the house of the then Home Secretary, who was, I forgot his name now, but a Labour Home Secretary. And there was a small demonstration outside his house. And the officer that went there said there was a small demonstration, 6 or 7 people, blah, 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 and nothing to report, really, which was made Gilbert quite cross, because he was asked by the Home Office, what's all this? Who are these people? Blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, you go the next time it happens, and I want a full report. So, of course, I went, and with the help of a lot, like the protection officers and the local police and all the rest of it, I was able to say who they were and what they were protesting about. And I can't remember what it was they were protesting, but I took this back to Gilbert, and he thanked me very much. And he said to me afterwards, we are not giving A8 much in the way of information about demonstrations and things. I think you ought to, try and ginger it up a bit, or words to that effect. And from then on, I felt I'd got a mission to do that, if you know what I mean. It was kind of not as grand as all that, but I felt that if I did that, then others would then say, oh, well, we can beat him at forecasting who was going to come on demonstrations. It'd be a kind of much more like a competition to get things right, rather than a game. But I went halfway along that road, I must admit. Yeah.
Can you recall when that was?
That would be immediately before, because I was on B Squad then. If you remember, I said it was B Squad, and I was brought back from port with not having been in touch with anything for about 3 years. So I had a lot of catching up to do, and I was some of the time acting Vic Gilbert's clerk because his proper clerk was often ill. So we saw a bit of Vic. And I think that would be 67 or 60, 66, that kind of.
Can you recall whether or not the Home Secretary was James Callaghan?
Oh, yeah. He was Home Secretary at just about the time of the demonstrations, wasn't he?
So what I'm asking you is, can you remember whether the demonstration was outside James Callaghan's house or was it outside a different minister's house?
Well, it's a different minister. Let me think now. This minister was rather domed, shiny hair, and domed forehead rather. I was a literary man. He wrote books, and after he retired, I can't think of his name, to be honest. But if it occurs to me, I'll mention it.
Thank you. Sticking with the period before the SDS was formed, did you think that the traditional methods were sufficient to obtain the information that the security service wanted from Special Branch about subversion?
Oh, that's a tall order, sir. I mean, you know, I was only a sergeant, and what the security service wanted was, at least to us, they just asked the questions, and we gave them. They wanted to identify people, basically, and so it was a question of adding clothes to sort of a naked subject. All they had was a name or something, and you would have to put the date of birth and all the rest of it. I think there was some dispute in the branch itself at one time about writing "he is known to me" on the report. And there was a lot of discussion because to say that he's known to me, I think was a throwback to the days when people were likely to be arrested, say, if they were suspected of being involved in espionage during the war. It was important that the officer who had written about him should be able to identify him. And now, with the people that MI5 were interested in, we weren't particularly. I mean, some people felt, quite rightly, that no need to put down "he is known to me" because, A, you've got to take a risk getting to know it. How could you say he's known to me without going down and look at it? And he would, not take kindly to that. Why should you do it? So that was the situation that they had what they wanted to know, and we were obliged to answer them. And,
Are you sorry?
Whether it's right or wrong.
Are you referring to a tension between doing your duty as a police officer and providing information on people who were in no way a threat to law and order?
You would have to be very fastidious to do that. No, I mean, if you were told to do something and it seemed reasonable and it came from on high, you couldn't quarrel with it, really. Right, if you were bold enough or silly enough or you didn't care. But normally, nobody in this life wants to make waves about something which is beyond their, it's beyond them to decide, really.
I see.
Can we pause there a moment? Mr. Creamer, you've been going for about an hour now. Do you want a break?
I'd like Yes. Yes, sir.
Right.
Just not long. 5 minutes will do.
Well, we have a minimum of 10, so is 10 all right?
Fair enough,
and
sir.
Is the name you were trying to find Roy Jenkins?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, sir.
We'll resume in 10 minutes.
All rise, please.
Refreshed?
Oh, yes, sir, thank you.
Good. Mr. Val.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Creamer, we'll move on then to the SDS. In your witness statement, you said that Uniform had complained that they were not getting enough intelligence about what to expect. Are you able to elaborate on that for us, please?
Well, yes. That was not said to me personally by AA because I, too much of a minion for them to talk to me. But I think at the top level, at the level of Vic Gilbert and the chief superintendent, and maybe in discussions which they must have had with the commissioner, they felt that it wasn't their fault that the demonstrations were the early ones, the March and previous ones, had been rowdy and caused police injuries. They felt it wasn't their fault, which it wasn't. I mean, no one's arguing about that. But I think they kind of suggested that it would be a bit better if Special Branch weren't so bland and simply write the demonstrators will start off at this particular point at this particular time and march to this particular point, because they already knew that. And in fact, they had the advantage of being able to interview the people that organising the demonstrations and arrange precisely that. So they didn't want their own information back. But they couldn't quantify or even describe what kind of information they wanted, nor could anybody really. It was sort of, I chose a way of, if, for example, they said, the organisers said that, we are going to bring 3,000 people, I would make it 4,000 if I thought it was going to be lively and horrendously vicious. That wasn't very often, mind you, but I was inclined to sort of exaggerate the numbers because saying anything in words to the effect that they will be anti-police or whatever, or even to suggest, for example, that provided it's carefully handled, you put sentences like that in, that's going to offend an enormous amount. I mean, they don't want to hear that either. So what is it that they do want? And I found that if you put a figure higher than they expected, that would do the trick, because you stood the chance that if they didn't turn up in those numbers, they wouldn't wouldn't take your assessment as being of any value either. But if you got it right, then you would establish some kind of understanding between the branch and A8. That if the branch said it was going to be big, it would be. And that's as much as you could do, really, because there's no way anybody can forecast the future, really. You just have to do the best you can.
In what circumstances did you personally come to join the SDS?
Well, it was I was on the desk dealt with Trotskys, and although I hadn't been there long, I was supposed to know all about them, and so I was the one that they would choose. But also, Conrad was looking for people that he knew were enthusiastic about doing the work and that kind of thing. And although I wouldn't say I was a shining star at work, or over energetic, he sensed that I'd got a lot to offer, and so he chose me. But I didn't really have a choice. I mean, how could you if you're in that situation? You're the anarchist on Trotsky's desk, and they're forming this special squad about Trotskyists, you've got to go. I mean, there was no pressure or anything like that. I just knew I would have to do it.
But what was your role?
On the squad,
Yes.
well, I've made it clear from the beginning I was not going to be an undercover officer for a start, because it was against my nature. I mean, you could tell that I like to go about openly. Not only that, I wouldn't get away with it for 1 minute, because Christie or somebody would say, hey, what's he doing here, and so on. So I said I wouldn't do it. But Conrad, I don't want to be unpleasant, not unpleasant, but I don't want to put him down in any way, but he took the job because it was an adventure. He had the feeling that it could be done. And if anybody was going to do it, he was going to do it. That is to say, have undercover officers into these difficult areas of left-wing extremism. And now he knew that I was a bit softer than that, and I would be there to kind of restrain him from doing anything really stupid. Now, that's what I kind of tacitly agreed with him about. So if I can, I don't want to make too much of it really, but I would help him with the report, I would look after the office, I would do this, that and the other. But mainly I would go out and listen to the meetings, the bigger ones in, Hall, in Red Lion Square and places, so that I had an overall view. So that when it came to the day when we have to say, answer the big question, is it going to be as rough as the press and everybody seems to think, or is it not? He would get it right. That's to say, whatever he thought, he would take account of my version of events so that it was reasonably likely to be true. And it wasn't articulated in any way. It's just that I knew what I had to do and he knew what to expect from me.
Mr. Creamer, can we look at some of the documents in the bundle? I'm going to start with ones, first of all, which do bear your name. Could we start with the document at tab 4, sir, of your bundle, and for the screen, MPS-0739-495. I don't think it'll be your bundle, Mr. Creamer. I think it'll be a different document. It will be... can you see the screen?
Yes.
Good. Now this is a report dated the 19th of September 1968. It's about the anti-imperialist solidarity movement. If we go to the bottom, it's signed by you. We've redacted your signature, and countersigned by Conrad Dixon.
Yeah.
Perhaps if we stay with the bottom paragraph, which reads, the anti-imperialist solidarity movement cannot be expected to have much influence on the VSC controlling bodies, but as will be seen from the attached leaflet, its potential for mischief is very high. And the report at the top tells us that it's just been formed. So is this the sort of analysis that you provided?
I'm sorry to say, sir, that isn't. That is written by an undercover officer.
Is it?
Yeah, I think I've thought about this, and a lot of documents are of that sort where my name appears, and all I can imagine is that anything that came from the undercover officers had to be kept so secret, even from the registry people, that whenever they got one, they simply put my name on it because everybody would know that it was from the STS. But only I would know whether I'd written it or not. And I thought to myself afterwards, well, when I write my own reports, instead of saying, for example, the following has been received from a reliable source, I should have said from a trustworthy source. Nobody'd notice the difference, but I would. And so I'd know which were my reports and which weren't. But that didn't happen. And these reports are all filed and put away, sometimes without my knowledge. It's not to say I hadn't read them, because obviously I needed to know what was in them. But I would not have read them with my name underneath, because I'd be surprised. I'd say, well, I haven't written this. But that is the situation, I'm afraid.
Well, from our knowledge of SDS reporting in this period, a lot of the reports are signed by the undercover police officers
Are they?
in this era.
Good.
And looking at that bottom paragraph, I think mischief is a word that you use quite a lot, isn't it?
It could be, but
Are you sure it's not yours?
well, just have another look. Yes, let's have a look. Well, I have no recollection of it, put it that way. And obviously I wish I had, but no, I can't say that I've written this at all.
Don't worry, Mr. Creamer, it is a very long time ago.
Yeah, yes.
We'll take that document down now, please, and if we can have in its place the document at tab 7 of your bundle, sir, which is MPS-0747725. And this is a document which is a report dated the 6th of January 1969 about the VSC Working Committee. Again, over the page, it's signed by you and countersigned in this case by either Ray or Ryby Wilson.
Yeah.
If we can go back to the top of the first page, please.
Yes.
It says, submitted herewith are copies of the minutes of 2 meetings of the Working Committee of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, which were held on the 5th and 12th of December 1968. Now, we've had to redact the content, but can you help us? Is getting inside the Working Committee of the VSC and reporting on what it was doing something that traditional special branch methods were likely to have been able to achieve?
No, they wouldn't. They would not be able to achieve that.
And I know it's difficult when we've had to redact the content, but would the content likely to have been of use to Special Branch in preparing for the demonstrations that the VSC were organising?
Oh, indeed, yes.
If we could take that document down now, please, and if we could have tab 9 up. It's UCPI 5014320. And this is a report dated the 22nd of January 1969. This is a report that runs to several pages. I can tell you that on the bottom of page 4, we have your signature again, countersigned by Conrad Dixon.
Yes, well, that is more like my work, really. But obviously with the help of an undercover officer, or maybe more than one.
And that is your analysis, broadly speaking, of those Maoist groups with an emphasis in those with Mr. Manchanda's influence.
Yes. You can see it would be helpful, but I mean, my motive in wanting to do that was that I was concerned that people understood which groups were doing the mischief. You know, it wasn't my anarchists, so to speak. It was these Maoists, and so it was. I had a kind of personal interest in that, but the young man who got the information, I can't remember who he was or anything.
No names, please. Okay, if we could go to page 3, please, Mr. Creamer. And I'm looking for the penultimate paragraph, the one that starts, Manchanda has one significant advantage.
Yeah.
About 2/3 of the way down that paragraph, it reads, to a casual supporter, he may appear to offer the ultimate in revolutionary activity, and no one is likely to be excluded from his groups for aggressiveness or violence on public demonstrations. Was that your understanding of how Mr. Manchanda's groups worked?
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed. I felt that, yes, exactly that, because in other words, he a lot of sounded brass and tinkling cymbal about his methods, but yeah, it's not kind of final assessment. It's just kind of that is what it's like now. What it will turn out to be eventually is probably a waste of, nobody would take any notice of him at all. But at that stage, it was a potential to, offer the ultimate in revolutionary activity. And, that's the way it was. But I had to have the sort of germ of the idea put to me by the undercover officer.
Thank you. Could we now take that down, please? I'm going to move from documents which you signed to some documents which you did not sign. And I would like, though, to know whether you either wrote them or had some input into them. These are in the supplementary bundle that we've put together. The first one is tab 2, sir, of your supplementary bundle. It's MPS-0730-061, and it's a report dated the 21st of August 1968. And that's very early in the life of the SDS. It's the first of a series of reports summarising, as I understand it, the SDS's understanding of preparations for the October demonstration. Yeah. It's signed by Conrad Dixon. It's countersigned by Arthur Cunningham. Yes. And it talks about the internal divisions between the different groups, those in favour of a more violent approach and those in favour of a peaceful approach, as well as the sort of targets that might be chosen en route. Yeah. Take as long as you need to familiarise yourself with the contents, Mr. Creamer, but is that a report that you wrote for Conrad Dixon?
No, it's a report that he wrote himself, and he's gone to it makes that clear by signing it himself and not including anybody else's name in it. And what I think happened there, what date is it? Yes, this is before the demonstration took place, isn't it?
Yes.
This was a build-up to the demonstration. And I feel a bit diffident about having to say this, but that wasn't from an undercover officer either. It was a source that knew what was going on and was prepared to tell us, but he wasn't an informant exactly. And I don't know who he was or anything like that. And it wasn't Conrad himself who had dealings with him. It was another officer. I could tell you the name of the other officer, but I'd rather not. And you can see that it's of a much higher standard than any of us could have written. even the vocabulary is different, but the fact that they were closer to the hierarchy of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign is quite apparent to me anyway. And I don't think Conrad, for all his talents, he couldn't have written it either.
Right. If we look at the next document at tab 3 is MPS 0730065.
This one, I can't read it.
It's,
Go on.
can you see it on the screen now?
No. Yes. Yes.
This is another document which is signed by Conrad Dixon and countersigned by Arthur Cunningham.
Yeah.
It's dated the 30th of August, so just over a week later.
Yeah.
It's again about the forthcoming autumn offensive. It starts with a contextual paragraph about events in Czechoslovakia, and then goes on to say that there's been a change of emphasis within the VSC in that the IMG was retreating from the gist is they were retreating from a violent stance.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to provide some information about the political leanings of members of the liaison committee and some intelligence about different branches. Our understanding, Mr. Creamer, had been that these were documents that were periodic updates on the state of progress of preparations for the autumn offensive. Are we understanding these documents correctly?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think it was kind of progress report every week, more or less. Anything of this nature and this level wouldn't be he might confide in me and show me, but by and large, that came from him and his the sources that were open to us then.
And so what, if any, input do you think came from you?
It's difficult to say. I would like to, obviously, have been more au fait with what was going on at the top level of the VSC, but I wasn't. I mean, there's no beating about the bush. It wasn't in the thing that I was either expected to do or ever did. But as I say, there was a help. And if you think about it, well, if I think about it, the business of IMG sort of opting out of this could well be what one might have mentioned earlier, is that some pressure had been brought to bear on them by the ordinary members of the Labour Party who felt that they'd gone too far, and any advantages that they might think have been allied to the Labour Party or whatever like that would go out the window, and they would be treated as pariahs and the rest of it. That kind of frightened them a bit, or not frightened them, but concerned them, and they dropped out. But only somebody who was well up in that would know. I mean, and it wasn't. I say it wasn't us. I hope it was an individual officer, but I can't imagine it. I don't think anybody was so erudite as to produce such stuff, really.
Okay, can we take that down and can we go to the document at tab 5, which is MPS 0730064, which is, it's a two-page report signed by Conrad Dixon, dated the 19th of September. And this one it postdates the National Council's, the VSC's National Council's meeting on the 7th of September 1968, which had decided largely on the route and form of the demonstration. It reports that those decisions were being hotly debated within VSC branches across the country, and then relates events at the large meeting held in Conway Hall on the 17th of September, at which, as we understand it, the Maoists had been outvoted by others as to the final route, and it had been decided that the route would not go past the US Embassy. It does, though, go on effectively to communicate that there were Maoist-influenced groups such as the Earl's Court and Notting Hill branches of the VSC that were going to take no notice of the vote and go their own way anyway. Now, we have seen a lot of SDS reporting about the meeting in Conway Hall, about branch meetings discussing events at the National Council, and we know that there were SDS officers in both the Earl's Court and Notting Hill branches of the VSC. We understand this to be essentially an amalgamation of intelligence gleaned by the SDS about the forthcoming demonstration.
Yes.
Are you able to help us with whether we're right or wrong about that?
Yes, you're on steady ground there. So, yeah.
And again, did you have anything to do with writing this report?
At this stage, I can't remember, but probably, yes. Yeah.
Can
certainly, well, if I can put it in simpler terms, really, to explain it to myself more than anything. Conrad was concerned with trying to prove that all this business of undercover work could be done and it was an adventure. I was more concerned that whatever else, we should not make a song or dance and make anybody more alarmed than they need be. That is to say, I would tone it down. If you said, as often happens in these, that people said, oh, we're going to march on the Ministry of Defence or Mansion House or whatever it is, I would say, no, don't bother with that. I had something to the effect that it was a lone voice or whatever and didn't mean anything, so that when I looked at the report, apart from anything else, I was kind of in a kind of sub-editor role of saying anything that was likely to alarm anyone should either not be put in or toned down or whatever. We had to tread carefully. I know I did. I mean, because if that was true and so on, and they were going to do that, then obviously I couldn't interfere. But if it was unlikely and just kind of thrown into because somebody had reported it, I would pressurize Conrad to take it up. So in a way, that was the kind of area in which I felt I could be useful. But as for getting the information in the first place, that was between Conrad and the staff. I didn't interfere in any of that. I had no idea who'd done what.
Thank you. If you could take that down now. Just going to show you one last document of this sort for a specific reason. If we could have up tab 6, MPS-0730-096. Now, this is another of these updating reports described as a regular weekly report. It's dated the 3rd of October 1968. What I'm interested in is the very bottom of this page. Thank you. Subparagraph C reads, information from Glasgow indicates that about 400 demonstrators will be coming from Scotland, of whom 160 will be from Glasgow itself. The latter contingent are being advised to wear crash helmets and urged to carry ball bearings, fireworks, hat pins and banner poles for use as weapons. Can you recall any concerns about violent Glaswegians being expected at the demonstration?
No, but I know in the early days we did not, presumably this came from the special branches up in Scotland. And in the early days we were not, I don't know, we just didn't contact provincial officers about our demonstrations because that was the tradition, we'd never bothered. But they obviously had a change of heart and wrote to all the special branches, I think, and along the lines, anything you can do to help us would be greatly appreciated and so on. So this has come from them. Now, I can't remember in particular, but I think if it had come to me to have a look at, I would say, well, I can't stop you putting it forward, but be sceptical about it because what people say they're going to do when they're on the bus or whatever is not necessarily what will happen when they get there. They might find they're outnumbered or that they're reluctant or whatever. So that it's not guaranteed this sort of thing will happen. But if we've been warned that it's going to happen, it's got to be mentioned, and AA ought to know. So in a way, I wouldn't interfere, and any interference from me wouldn't be welcome at all. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to Glaswegians in a moment.
Yeah.
If we could take that down, please. I'm now going to take you to two documents which are dated the 27th of October 1968, obviously the day of the demonstration itself. They're both telegrams. The first one is tab 1 of the supplementary bundle. That's MPS-0733955. This is the earliest of the two. It's timed at 11:15 in the morning. Now,
I know the one you mean, yeah, without looking, yeah.
this one says it's from you to the chief. Yeah, have a look at this.
I see, yeah. Yeah.
It says it's from you to the Chief Superintendent of Special Branch, and it says a group of about 20 Maoists intend to commence leafleting at the embankment from 11:30 a.m. onwards in order to catch the early demonstrators and persuade them to march later to Grosvenor Square. And it's signed by a constable. We can see from what's written below that Chief Superintendent Cunningham had spoken to Commander Lawless.
Yeah.
So this seems to be very much real-time intelligence on the day.
Yes.
Can you help us with whether you would have been on the embankment with the Maoists or whether you were in the office sending the telegram from one part of Special Branch to another?
No, I was in the office, and this is from one of the undercover officers. Well, even there, well, yes, it may have been an undercover officer. It may have been an ordinary officer that wasn't undercover.
I see. Now, if we could take that down, please.
Could I ask, did the constable sign his name and so on?
Yes, we redacted it for privacy reasons. And
yes, but
it won't have been an SDS. It won't have been an SDS officer because we would have put the SDS officer's nominal.
no, but the fact that he signed it suggests to me that it was somebody outside the SDS who'd been detailed to look out, early in the day to see, just for that sort of thing.
I see.
They would do that.
Good. Thank you. If we could have up the document which is in the original bundle at tab 4A, it's MPS 0733 954. Now, this is the one that was in your original witness pack. It's, again, same date, but later in the day, 1845 hours. This one says it's from Detective Inspector Saunders to the Chief
Yes.
Superintendent Special Branch,
Yes.
and is signed by you. And it says, I am in the vicinity of South Audley Street. Since about 4 p.m, I have been with a group of some 200 anarchists from Liverpool and Glasgow who broke away from the main march at Hyde Park Corner. They have engaged in various sorts of hooliganism in the vicinity of Grosvenor Square. They led the charge towards the US Embassy along South Audley Street from its inception, and for the past 2.5 hours they have been confronting police. They have been joined by contingents of the International Marxist Group and various VSC elements from Hyde Park. They are at present at the head of the column in South Audley Street, which is confronting police at the junction of the southwest corner of Grosvenor Square. I will give a full account of their activities in due course. Can you help us, first of all, with what was your role in the generation of this telegram?
Well, it's a long time ago, and I'm not quite sure, but I was in the office for that very purpose, to take messages from whoever was outside. So I must have done that. And as for the content, well, D.I. Saunders would know more about what Glasgow had told us. So he would be aware of the background and would see the dangers of all this. And all I could do would be, I think, I didn't have to do it. It looks as though it says Chief Superintendent, somebody or other to see. This would be sent instantly to A8 because it was happening. The drawback there, of course, is that it's such a long-winded way of getting information to A8 that it's probably too late. I mean, probably they were there before, but the advantage for A8 would be they're on the spot and they can see it just as well as Saunders could. But to be told by us that who they were would be helpful. But of course, it's it's a good piece of work. I can't argue with it. It's very good. And my message, in part in it, was simply to pass on the message.
Because presumably you would have remembered if you'd been in Grosvenor Square with 200 violent Liverpudlian and Glaswegian anarchists.
I heard all about it afterwards. Yeah, it was violent, apparently. I mean, you know, I was a bit disappointed to have to been put in Scotland Yard and not go out and see what was happening, but that's the way it was.
On to rather more mundane matters. Do you know whether Conrad Dixon went to the Home Office or met the Home Secretary in relation to the October demonstration?
No, I don't know. I mean, I didn't need to know, and there was a lot of that about it. If it wasn't, you know, you didn't need to know, you wouldn't know.
We can take the document down now, thank you. Do you know whether Conrad Dixon took any legal advice or received any legal advice about how to operate an undercover police unit?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I'm pretty certain he didn't. And it wasn't in his nature to do that. He saw this as a challenge. And he didn't want to be inhibited by any scruples that other people might have, because he trusted himself to be as scrupulous as the situation demanded, no more and no less. And to be honest, that's the situation.
You've made various observations in your witness statement about what the SDS did and did not do in relation to policing the October demonstration. What is your overall assessment? Did undercover policing make a big difference or not?
I'm not quite sure what the question was. Just repeat it.
In policing the autumn offensive, did the use of undercover officers make a big difference or not?
Overall, oh, certainly yes, but on the day, none. You could say they weren't in the position of, they weren't even told what to do. I mean, they could go on it, and obviously if their branch or group went on it, but they had to behave themselves just like anyone else. But overall, the standard of information that A8 received from us was far higher than anything that could have been done before, without a doubt.
Now, one of the reasons why I asked you that is there were two comments which were a little doubtful. The first was you said that VSC groups were very badly supported sometimes, and there would be hardly anybody there, and looking there did not help. But VSC groups were where a lot of SDS officers were deployed.
Yeah, that is the situation, mind you. I mean, it can't be helped. You see, had the situation been such that there was a great deal of interest among the general public in the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, and these groups, these individual places like Putney or wherever, filled up with people all anxious to get on the demonstration and show how opposed they were to the Americans and to the war. That would be one thing, and that would enable you to say, well, look, even at this level, there's a whole lot of interest. So, it's going to be big. Now, if it was the opposite, which is what was the truth, that hardly anybody went there. And those who went there weren't particularly, not the sort to alarm you in any way. That was helpful in kind of reassuring the powers that be that there's not going to, at least there's no great call for a big violent demonstration. In fact, there's not much of a call for it at all, at all. Now, you couldn't put that down as the very last word, but it was just an indication that had we not gone there and looked at who was going to go, we would have been missing out. The fact that nobody much went there was helpful, I've no doubt. But extravagant, of course. I mean, you shouldn't have, that's what I felt at the time. You shouldn't need to have a man of a rank of inspector or chief inspector go into a meeting of 6 or 7 people. That was awful. I mean, in terms of use of officers, but on the other hand, potentially it could have been very helpful. As events turned out, it wasn't. But I don't think you could criticise anybody for it because we had to do everything in a hurry. There was no hope of getting, information from the top. And what undermined the whole situation was looking for evidence of pre-planning and plots to violence and all that kind of thing. They did not exist. So we were not going to find them anyway. And, we had to work against that background. Hope, so to speak. I think I've written somewhere in my statement that, I've forgotten what it was now. But
you've written something to that effect.
I've done something to that effect, yes.
Yes. Righto, thank you. Can I move now to fatherly advice?
Oh, yeah.
You say that you gave fatherly advice to the officers about not taking drugs.
Yeah.
not getting involved in mischief, and not getting illnesses. What sort of mischief were you referring to?
Oh, well, I was really addressing myself to those who were going to do the anarchist, try and join an anarchist group. Oh, they do fly posting, which isn't that mischievous, but they might do objectionable, sort of painting of walls, and for which they could very well be arrested. That kind of mischief, that's not terrible, but better not do it, because then we've got a problem if they are arrested as to how to proceed. I mean, you can't go to the police station and say, let him go, it's an undercover officer. Or at least I felt that. Maybe you could, but I didn't want them to get into that situation at all. And in those days, drugs were fairly novel, but it was quite common among anarchist-minded people to smoke pot, without a doubt. And one of the consequences of injecting themselves with heroin or whatever it is that they transmitted, I can't remember what disease it was, but some sort of disease which would, injure them for life, really. So I felt they ought to, I don't say they needed that advice, they probably knew more about it than I did, but I felt that was the gist of what I concerned only with the anarchist law. I didn't know too much about with the others.
About not getting illnesses.
Well, that's what I mean. They're not getting hepatitis B, is it? Some such thing, which you can get if you mix with drug takers. I mean, you can't order somebody not to get ill, can you? It's rather badly put, but that's what I meant.
Were you referring at all to sexually transmitted diseases?
Oh, no. To be honest, I never gave that thought. I'm amazed, really, that it should ever come up, because it's quite awful, really. And I imagined that they could flirt with people and do all sorts of things. I mean, you're dealing with fellas that are very presentable and attractive young in themselves. I mean, they would get attention from women, but it's nonsense to sleep with them. I can't imagine any of the ones that I knew, I knew most of them, would do such a thing.
Can I move on now? After the demonstration, you have written in your witness statement, I thought the SDS would pack up anyway because we had done our job with the VSC. Do you think that the SDS should have packed up?
Yeah, I do. I'm afraid so, because what we should have done, and what the powers that be should have done, was to say, that was well done, because it was. But it's hedged around with all sorts of difficult problems. Why don't we sit back, take a look at what we've done, pick out the good bits, throw out the bad bits, and if we have to, try again. But I really felt that the battle had been won, basically. Well, not so much that, not the VSC demonstration, but one of the problems with demonstrations is the police were very reluctant to cancel them. They felt that the public wouldn't want them to cancel them, and especially with a thing like Vietnam, there would be more trouble if they tried to prevent them taking place than was worth it. But after the Lewisham business, which was a clash between National Front and the left wing generally, the commissioner and whoever advises him said, right, we're going to be in a position to ban really violent demonstrations. So in a way, that clinched it for me. I thought, well, fine, we don't need any more undercover officers. And I'm really quite surprised that it continued, but I had nothing to do with it. I mean, really, I went back to my desk and kept out of the hair of the, well, I just didn't have anything to do with them. But I didn't know people involved, except one occasion when arriving well, whatever, one of the officers told me that they were sure and needed somebody. Could I kindly look out and see what I thought and find somebody for them? Or if I found somebody for them, would I let them know? I did that once, I think, but by and large, I wasn't an enthusiast for it because, as you can see, it's hedged about with so many problems.
Thank you. Operational security. You say in your witness statement that there were verbal briefings by commanders and senior persons in the branch. For example, quote, "We do not want the SDS to get out, do not create trouble, and do not make waves."
Yeah.
Can you help us with what they meant by that?
Well, I think the man at the top in those days was Ferguson Smith. And Ferguson Smith had fought during the war and had gone on secret missions over Germany as a RAF navigator. So he had this a kind of wartime feeling about security, that, dangerous talk and all that sort of thing. So he was of the belief, and it said so, that this should not get out. It will not get out. It would go as far as that. Because I remember saying to him one day, he could talk to people in those days, however high the rank was. And I said, we ought to take the view that we'll do nothing that when it comes, if it ever comes to light, that the public would not approve of. And he said to me, it will not come out. And of course, if you're going to start with that belief that it will not come out, you are given carte blanche to do, well, whatever you like. And I thought that was not right, but couldn't really say it, couldn't argue with him. He was the boss. And on the point that it should not come out, I agreed with him. It shouldn't come out. Because I mean, imagine if it had come out at the time that the police had undercover officers, there would be a much worse situation, from the left. They would resent it, and people who wouldn't normally have gone to a demonstration, they'd go over there and say, we're protesting against police interference in our lives, and so on and so forth.
I've got about 10 or 15 minutes more questions for you, Mr. Creamer. Are you happy to continue, or would you like another break?
If I can have a drop of water.
Of course you can.
I must say, so I don't want to sound too flippant about all this. I know we're dealing with a very serious subject, but when we were in that squad, it was a lark in many ways. It was an adventure. There was no ill will towards the people we were penetrating or whatever. It was an experiment to see if it could be done. That was the theme of Conrad's belief. So a lot of the seriousness of it has been faded away, I'm afraid.
May I just explain what we would like to do, and you tell me if you're happy to go along with it. Mr. Barr says I think he has about another quarter of an hour's worth of questions. We would then have a 20-minute break so that anyone who wants him to ask you things that he hasn't already asked can make that suggestion. And he would then ask whatever questions he thinks right arising out of that. And then your counsel will re-examine you, if at all, very briefly. In other words, if we adopt that arrangement, you're likely to be here for, at worst, an hour, and possibly a little less. Would you be content with that?
Me personally, yes. I don't mind. I would like a cup of tea now, of course.
Can you wait for a quarter of an hour for your cup of tea?
Thank you.
No, I was wondering, can you wait for a quarter of an hour to get your cup of tea, or do you want it immediately?
No, I could wait.
Splendid, right. Then we'll ensure you have long enough to have a cup of tea.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Creamer. I'm now going to move to your time in Special Branch after the SDS. Did you ever occupy a role where you were compiling the threat assessments for A8?
Oh yes. That's what I really like doing. Yeah.
And when you were doing that, did you have a relationship with the SDS?
Well, it's a bit thorny, really, because they were kind of snooty about it. They would only say, for example, oh, we haven't got anybody interested in that. They were in, I mean, demonstrations come in all sorts of form. And if it's not IS and if it's not WS, whatever it is, IMG or one of the groups that they were involved with, they couldn't tell you any more than anybody else. So it was a bit disappointing. It was called Special Demonstration Squad, but it didn't do what you would expect a Special Demonstration Squad should do. That is to say, take over the whole business and do the assessments. So they left it to us. Now, it didn't cause any real friction. It just made me feel a bit disappointed, really, that had I stayed in SDS myself, that would have been my chief purpose, to make use of it in that way. But I didn't dare ask what they were up to or who was doing what. And I thought, well, we can manage without, go back to the old-fashioned methods and be all right. Of course, tricky. I mean, by and large, I was right about most of the things I assessed, but I couldn't say that I was, 100% perfect. But I did what I could.
Did you ever make requests of the SDS for intelligence about particular forthcoming events or particular fields? Or...
No. I mean, the people above me might have done. I dare say they would, but I wasn't. I wasn't in that position really. I mean, even to go into their office, I wouldn't do. I'd left, and they had their own problems, and they didn't want any interference, and I didn't want to.
Were you able to make an assessment, relatively, as to how helpful the SDS intelligence was in compiling threat assessments for A8?
Well, in my time, probably not much. But what happened afterwards, I don't know. I think it got a lot better. I didn't. Oh, well, I had to take notice of the fact when they said we're not interested, nobody's coming from IS and then IMG or whatever. I had to bear that in mind. But no, I didn't think what they had to offer the ordinary squad officer doing an assessment. In those days, I thought could have been a lot better, but maybe the groups that demonstrated weren't necessarily of interest. Well, I mean, they wouldn't be of interest to them, but they were of no account, if you know what I mean. Some of the demonstrations that, there were sort of people from what used to be the London Polytechnic would run around the streets for a while and make trouble. But they were so small that the SDS probably didn't even know them. So we had to assess that kind of a thing without the help of the SDS. But had there been anything larger than that, which did involve the people they were interested in, then they would have had a different role. But in my time, though, which wasn't very long, to be honest, could have been 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But I personally didn't. But I don't want to knock them in any way. It's just that that's the way it was.
Can I show you now two specific reports? The first one is MPS-0728-675. Now, this is a minute sheet on the front. And if we scroll down a little bit, we will see there's a reference to you. which seems to suggest that you were to see this report. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, well that was a fairly routine thing, sir. And
Yeah.
anything that to do with Trotskyists or anarchists that was in the non-SDS part of the branch, I would have to see.
Well, this report is in fact about the Troops Out movement. So if we go on, please, to the next page.
Yeah.
It's dated the 4th of July 1975.
Yeah.
It's about the Troops Out movement. And in particular, it is a meeting of supporters of Jerry Lawless. In other words, a meeting of a faction within Tom,
Yeah.
who were at loggerheads at the time with the Revolutionary Communist Group and Workers' Fight. If we scroll down, please, and on to the next page, Rick Gibson at the bottom there was the cover name of an undercover police officer. So there was an SDS UCO at this meeting. And if we go on to the next page, you'll see the signatures, the Chief Inspector and the Chief Superintendent. We think that the signature of the Chief Inspector may have revealed to you that this was SDS intelligence. Would that or any other indicator on this have indicated to you that this was SDS intelligence?
Yes, because it's signed by a chief inspector and not by a constable. I think that's a JH somebody, and I did when I saw it earlier or before. I had no idea. We had two people who could fit that. One was, but I can't remember now. What JH?
Let me.
But whether he was on the SDS then, I don't know.
Okay, well, let me take this document down and show you the next one, which dates from March 1976. It's MPS-0728-785. It's dated the 25th of March 1976. And again, on the minute sheet, towards the bottom of the screen there, you can see it says seen by D.I. Creamer, amongst other things. And it's got your signature on it. So you see this report appears to have crossed your desk. If we move down onto the next page, please. See the report itself. It's the 25th of March 1976. It's about the London Coordinating Committee of Tom. And if we scroll down further, please. It says, in the paragraph which starts at the top of the screen, if you go to the bottom of that paragraph, it says Gibson was chosen to fill the post of convener and privacy to take over from Gibson as the Tom London organiser. So you see this undercover officer is assuming quite significant posts. He's taking on the post of national convener for this organisation. And if we scroll down to the signature block at the end of the report, please. It's signed by Geoffrey Craft.
Yeah.
Would you have known at the time that Geoffrey Craft was the Detective Chief Inspector in charge of the SDS?
Yes, I knew that.
So it would have been apparent to you, wouldn't it, that you were looking at a report from the SDS?
Yeah.
Did you know that Rick Gibson was an undercover police officer?
No.
I've shown you these two reports because the first one shows that Rick Gibson was involved in factional infighting within the group. He was meeting with one of the factions. I am understanding your evidence to be that you did not know that he was an undercover police officer.
Yeah, well, that's so.
If you had known that, would it have been of concern to you that Mr. Gibson was taking sides within an organisation he was infiltrating?
Of course it would, yes. Can I just go back a page? It says DI Creamer to see, or has seen, or whatever. And then a chief superintendent, a signature that I am the chief superintendent. Now, that's all wrong, isn't it?
Let's just get that minute sheet back up.
Yeah.
It's to be the first page. After the cover sheet, those cover sheets, I'm afraid, throw us from time to time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. See there?
Yes.
Where it says Roy Creamer, and underneath it says Chief Superintendent. Well, that's absurd, isn't it? So there's something odd about the whole thing. And at this stage, I can remember clearly that I did not have anything to do with Troops Out movement, and it was the concern of other officers. And I personally thought Lawless, well, I had an opinion of him, which I didn't tell you, but I didn't think that of him, to be honest, and I wouldn't be that interested in what he was up to be honest, either.
Okay, thank you. Would you have been concerned if you had known that the person who was calling himself Rick Gibson was an undercover police officer, that he was also assuming high office?
In Troops Out, or whatever. It shouldn't have happened, but then, let's face it, I couldn't have, even if I'd known. I mean, I wouldn't dare interfere with what the SDS were doing. I mean, apart from anything else, Troops Out movement is related to Irish matters, isn't it? It's nothing to do with homegrown Trotskyists and anarchists. And maybe the powers that be thought that if they've got to keep tabs on Irish matters, the search goes everywhere. So we'll have a look at Troops Out movement, which they're probably concerned about. But I wasn't, and I had no reason to be. I mean, it wasn't in my pact at all. So frankly, if I saw it, which I doubt, I don't know why they put seen by DI Creamer, because I don't recall it at all. And secondly, I wasn't at the time a chief superintendent.
Thank you. If we could take that down. There's two more things I want to ask you about. The first is a document which is at tab 18 of the bundle, UCPI 5030775. Now, this is a note for file made by the Security Service on the 16th of March 1978, and it relates to a meeting on the 14th of March 1978, and as you will see from paragraph 1, it says that Superintendent Ray Wilson and Inspector Roy Creamer of Metropolitan Police Special Branch discussed various aspects of anarchism with F7 and me. It was agreed that A, we've had to redact the next bit, and I would discuss the F7 contribution to the National Special Branch Conference on Domestic Anarchists with C Squad in more detail when we were clear about what we wanted to say. In particular, we would seek MPSB clearance for the use of target material. One of the points we needed to put across was that provincial police forces needed to tell us, and did not always do so, about acts of violence committed in their areas with apparent political connections. B, MPSB would consider the possibility of putting someone alongside privacy of revolutionary struggle. Now, my question to you is that reference at little b about putting someone alongside privacy and privacy of revolutionary struggle a reference to inserting an SDS officer into that group? Please, when you answer, don't say anything about any alternative sources.
Well, frankly, I don't know. I remember going with Ray Wilson, but what we discussed and things like that, I don't know. I think he took me along in case he was asked questions about anarchism and that kind of thing that he couldn't answer for himself. But that part of the conversation, such as it was written down, I have no idea. I didn't follow it. I think we were in a position to say we'll put somebody alongside because we had the SDS. But whether we said it or whatever or not, I don't know.
In your experience, and if you can't speak to this, just say so, but in your experience, what influence did C Squad have in the tasking of SDS undercover police officers?
None. It was up to the SDS themselves. I think the most that you could say would be C Squad could have a power of veto or even sort of put forward what they thought they should be doing. But as best of my knowledge, they didn't. I think we all kind of kept it at arm's length because none of us were quite sure where it was leading.
Are you able to help us with the role or influence that C Squad had in passing on requests from the security service to the SDS for intelligence?
No, I wasn't the admin man on G Squad. I was one of the operatives. There was that was for Ray Wilson and whoever to do with that. And anything from the security service was treated with great, sort of alacrity if they wanted it. They were the people that mattered because they were, don't say they were our supervisors, but they were on level higher than us, and we should do what they want, really.
The last topic I want to ask you about, did you ever sit on the industrial desk?
No, never. I didn't want to know that. So.
Thank you. I think if the chairman agrees, it's tea time.
It is. Does 20 minutes give you long enough?
Yes, thank you very much.
Good. Then we'll adjourn for 20 minutes.
All rise, please.
Mr. Barr,
No more questions from me, thank you.
any re-examination? Thank you, Mr. Creamer. Your evidence is now finished. I'm very grateful to you for illuminating for us as vividly as you have all those events of more than 50 years ago. Thank you. Then we will adjourn now until tomorrow at 10. Thank you.